Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Event Director of the Game Developers Conference, Megan Scavio.
Good morning and welcome to the Game Developers Conference. The gentleman about to take the stage to present this morning's keynote doesn't really need much of an introduction. As the creator of some of the greatest games ever made, from Railroad Tycoon through Pirates to the Civilization series, he has already taken his place on the list of legendary game design icons. And he's not done yet. So please join me in welcoming the Director of Creative Development at Firaxis and the father of computer gaming, Mr. Sid Meier.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. It's great to be here. The title of this talk is The Psychology of Game Design. Everything you know is wrong. I was going to call it, people are funny, gamers are goofy, it's all in your head, or everything you know is questionable. But I thought everything you know is wrong, kind of get the juices flowing, maybe get a little more interaction. The premise of this talk is that, is there any way to get the slides up in the back of the hall? Is that game design is a psychological experience. Gameplay is a psychological experience. When I design a game, a lot of my games are based on historical topics, the history of civilization, railroads, pirates. And the way I would generally approach those topics is, make it realistic, make it true, make it about, the more historical I can make the game, the better it would be. The more railroady the game is, the better. The more piratey it is, the better. And what I found in taking that approach was that a lot of what I thought I knew was wrong. And the reason was because I really hadn't taken into account what really happens in the player's head. And once that became an important part of kind of my design process, things started to become a lot clearer. So the premise here is that by acknowledging the gameplay is really a psychological experience, we can save ourselves a lot of time in certain areas. It makes certain parts of the process easier. It makes other parts of the process more difficult. But at the end of the day, I think we end up with a better game. In the process, as we kind of explore this idea, we're going to kind of run into a few psychological concepts. Egomania is one of them we'll have to explore. Basically, if you play Civilization, you are an egomaniac. I mean, it says right on the box, build a civilization to stand the test of time. And you're there like, oh yeah, I can do that. No problem. So you are an egomaniac, okay. We'll also be looking into paranoia, delusion, and self-destructive behavior. This is ways that players actually kind of make the game less fun for themselves. Things they do to kind of detract from the fun of the game, and ways that as a designer we can try and minimize those, preempt those, and try and prevent that from happening. So those are some of the things we'll be looking at in the course of this talk. So the first area where psychology really kind of plays an important role in game design is something I call the winner paradox. In real life, we don't always win. There are 28 teams in the National Football League, and only one of them gets to win the Super Bowl. There are 25 teams in the NBA. They all go to the playoffs, I guess, but at the end of the day, there's only one team that gets to hold the golden trophy of NBA championness or whatever that is. So in the real world, the winner, you don't always win. However, in the world of games, you pretty much always win. And the psychological phenomenon is that the player doesn't really complain about that, doesn't object. That's not a problem. I don't get letters saying, dear Sid, I loved your game, but I won way too much. And this is actually true of other forms of entertainment. Rambo, at the end of the movie, he's going to come out all right. Sherlock Holmes always solves the mystery by the end of the chapter. So I think this is kind of fundamental to entertainment, but it's certainly something that we're aware of in designing video games. That the player's looking for a satisfactory conclusion. That might not always include winning, but very often it does. And this idea of kind of a satisfactory conclusion to the game, I think, is something to really keep in mind in the design process. Some of the tools that we have at our disposal to create this journey for the player through the game, reward and punishment. In other words, good things happening to the player, not so good things happening to the player. There's an interesting dichotomy in how these are deployed in games. When you reward the player, you discovered this cool place on the map. Here's 100 gold. The player gladly accepts that, doesn't question, did I really earn that? Do I deserve that? Players are very much inclined to accept anything you give them gladly and feel it was their own clever play, their own incredible strategy that earned them that cool reward. On the other hand, if something bad happens to the player, your game is broken, there's something horribly wrong, the game is cheating, it's really important to be very careful with the setbacks that the player experiences in the game. It's important that the player understand why those things happened, and especially how to prevent that from happening the next time. And anytime you can kind of plant that seed of the next time in the player's head, you're well on your way to this idea of replayability, that the player's going to play again. Next time I'm going to try something different, and maybe that might not happen. So a big part of the value of these games is in their replayability. So any opportunity that you have to plant the seed of replayability, I think, is important. And by really carefully handling the idea of punishment and setbacks, where you explain why it happened and how it can be prevented the next time. That's very important. In terms of rewards, another key thing that we think about is the first 15 minutes. One of our rules of game design is that the first 15 minutes have to be really compelling, really fun, kind of almost a foreshadowing of all the cool stuff that's going to happen later in the game. And these rewards are really a way of making the player feel comfortable in this world, letting them know that they're on the right track. They're on their way. Cool stuff is happening, and even cooler stuff is going to be happening later on. And these early rewards, you can almost not reward the player enough in the very early stages of the game to kind of get them invested, get them committed, get them to be part of the world that you're creating. Now, this doesn't negate the value of difficulty levels. I'm not advocating an elastic difficulty that always pushes the player forward and never provides any challenges. A number of years ago, I gave a talk on difficulty levels and was very convincingly made the point that 4 difficulty levels were the perfect number of difficulty levels. There needed to be one for introducing the player to the game, where the player could basically always win, one for the casual player, one for the player who's really experienced, and then the 4th difficulty level, which would be the ultimate challenge. I was wrong about that. Apparently we need 9 difficulty levels. The latest Civilization 4 has 9 difficulty levels, and it really points out how this idea of progress and advancement is so rewarding for the player. The reason we have these difficulty levels is to give the player this feeling that there's always another challenge out there, that they've mastered this level, they're ready to move on to the next level. And that's another reward, is this idea of getting to the next level in the game. So you want your player to feel that they are above average. They're doing well, and they're going to do even better as they go deeper into the game. I think that, again, if you kind of follow the first 15-minute rule, it's very important that you kind of start the player off with a very positive experience. The unholy alliance. This is a concept that I want to trademark. I think this is a really cool idea. I missed out on the uncanny valley, and I never trademarked interesting decisions. But unholy alliance, I think, is a concept that, in many ways, defines the relationship between the player and the designer. The unholy alliance is an agreement that the player and the designer make with each other. I'm going to pretend certain things, you're going to pretend certain things, and together we'll have a great experience. So one of the things that we pretend as designers is that the player is good. You're really good. That's kind of a mantra from us, that we want the player to feel good about the play experience and themselves as they're playing. And one example, perhaps of where this kind of went off the tracks, is in the history of flight simulators going back a number of years. Early on, they were kind of easy to play, very accessible. You'd shoot down a lot of planes, you'd have a lot of fun. And then we got to where every succeeding iteration of flight simulators became a little more realistic, a little more complex, a little more of a simulation. And pretty soon the player went from I'm good to I'm not good. I'm confused. My plane is on fire and I'm falling out of the sky. And the fun kind of went out of them. And I think we have to be aware of this phenomenon, that it's all about the player. The player is the star of the game. Their experience is what's key, what's critical. And keeping them feeling good about themselves is certainly an important part of the experience that we provide for them. Another part of this unholy alliance is the player's role. The player really needs to be willing to suspend their disbelief. They need to inhabit that character. They need to take on that role that you're providing them, whether it's a king of a great civilization or managing a railroad or being a cool pirate. The player has to be willing to suspend their disbelief. That's they're part of the bargain. When we go to a movie, my wife, I ask her after we've seen a movie, how did you like the movie? A lot of times she'll say, well, I came out of that movie twice, or I never got into that movie, or I never came out of the movie. Very aware of the value of suspending your disbelief to enjoy the experience or to make it more compelling. So part of our job is to help the player to suspend their disbelief. And I think in some ways, those of us that are old-time designers have a little bit of an advantage there, in that we worked in the good old days of 16-color graphics and things like that, where we really had to work hard to get the player to believe that what was happening on the screen was the management of a great empire or building a railroad system or things like that. So I think having that experience was helpful in really understanding some of the challenges of getting the player to suspend their disbelief. One of the other agreements that we make, I think, in this unholy alliance with the player is the idea of moral clarity. And let me give you an example. Here's a screenshot from Civilization Revolution, where we're negotiating with the great Genghis Khan. And one of the comments that I got back from playtesters was, these leaders, are very kind of cranky and aggressive. I might be winning the battle against them. They might be down to their last city, and they're still kind of up there saying, hey, you'll never take me down. I'm the greatest civilization of all time. Come on, attack me. I dare you. And they said, well, that just doesn't seem right. They shouldn't have that attitude if I'm winning. And my question was, well, what would you like them to say? Do you want them to say, oh, please don't hurt me. We have only one city left, and there's women and children there, and, please leave me alone. To me, that's like a moral dilemma, I want to win. I want to capture their city. It's Genghis Khan, for goodness sake. But I'm faced with a moral dilemma. I think it's more satisfying, and that's something we discovered. It's more satisfying to win against bad Genghis, cranky Genghis, than it is if there was some kind of a moral cloud over the actions that you were taking. MAD is a concept called mutually assured destruction. How many of you remember the Cold War? Let's hear it for the Cold War. Okay. The idea of mutually assured destruction was that, we had all these nuclear weapons and the Russians had all these nuclear weapons, and we could just blow each other up anytime we wanted to. But the reason we didn't, because we knew the other side had all these nuclear weapons. And there's an amazing parallel to that in the relationship between game designers and the player. The player can actually destroy the experience at any time they want to. They can quit the game. They can, play in a different way. They can cheat. They can do all sorts of stuff to kind of destroy the experience. And as a game designer, we can mess up the game as well. We can kind of lose the thread of the fantasy. There was a game that we were working on at Microprose many years ago that kind of illustrated this to me. It was an adventure game, and basically. You kind of started at the beginning of the road, and you adventured your way on down until you got to the castle, and finally got to see the king, and had gone through this great adventure. And when you got to the king, all of a sudden it was revealed to you that the king, who you thought was a good guy, is actually a bad guy, and everything was turned around, and you had to go back down the path you just come back to the beginning to do the real thing that you were supposed to do in the first place. So. To me, that was us messing up the game. I mean, basically, I can imagine the design meetings. Imagine the look on the player's face when they realize that all this work they've done was in vain, and the surprise and the amazing design. They'll think, what an amazing design to surprise me like that. I said, no, that's not what they're going to think. They're going to think I just wasted 8 hours on this stupid game, and so. At that point, they would mutually assuredly destruct the game, I believe, and so there are ways, I think, again, that we need to be careful that we're true to the story of the game and value the player's time. Another part of this alliance, I think, that we make with players is in the area of style, things that convey. What the spirit of your game is, if you start the game off and it's kind of, have kind of a lighthearted, music, atmosphere, cartoony graphics, and all of a sudden people's heads start exploding, then you haven't lived up to the alliance. You're not giving the player what you promised them. On the other hand, if you have dark, foreboding sound and music, and ends up being a very simple game, again, you kind of are fooling the player. And if I'm playing a game that starts off light and happy and cartoony, and all of a sudden terrible things start to happen, that's when the player loses their suspension of disbelief and turns off your game and moves on. So I think. The only way to kind of maintain this suspension of disbelief, which is critical to keeping the player in the game, is to really make that a priority and use things like humor, style, music, atmosphere, all these tools to be consistent and keep the player in your world. So probably where it became most clear to me that player psychology has absolutely nothing to do with rational thought was in the process of putting together the battle system in Civilization Revolution. My background is in mathematics and science and programming, and I think of myself as a logical person. And what we did in Revolution was we would show you before a battle what the odds were. In this example, our attacker here has a 1.5, and the defender, the barbarians, have a 0.5. They would have a 1. The barbarians are basically 1. But since they're uncivilized, they take a 50% penalty for that. So they're only 0.5. And part of the fun of being a designer is kind of throwing those little things into the game, uncivilized, minus 50%. Take that. So in this case, as a mathematician, this would be a 3-to-1 battle. 1.5 to 2.5. 3-to-1. The attacker should win 3 times. The defender should win 1 time out of 4. Very clear, very simple. That's what mathematics says. That's the way it should work. That's not the way our players saw it. Basically, at a certain point, players feel they are going to win the battle. And they would come to me and said, I had this battle. It was 3-to-1, and I lost. I was like, well, yeah, 3-to-1. You're going to lose every once in a while. I said, no, you don't understand. It was 3-to-1. 3's big. 1 is small. I had the big number. Shouldn't I have won? So I realized, okay, there's something going on here. So we adjusted our system by actually breaking the battle up into kind of more atomic little battles to make the results come out more than the player expected. And then I watched some more players playing, and this time the player had 1 against 3. The player had 1, the little tiny 1, and the AI had the big gigantic 3. And I watched, and lo and behold, the player won the battle. And I said, doesn't that feel wrong to you? That you with your little tiny 1 against the huge 3? And they said, no, doesn't feel wrong at all. I had, clever tactics and strategy, clean living. It all adds up to me winning. So we realized that something was going on there psychologically that isn't exactly mathematics. I'm not sure what it is, but it's not mathematics. So we made a few adjustments and said, okay, now are you happy with the way combat works? And we found that there is this point, and it's kind of around 3-to-1, 4-to-1, where people do expect to pretty much win every time. So okay, we said, okay, that's fine. We can live with that. Anything else? They said, well, there's this one little thing. I'm okay. Here's a 2-to-1 battle. Are you okay with winning most of the time, but every now and then losing at 2-to-1? The player said, yeah, 2-to-1. I'm okay with that. 2-to-1. I should win most of the time, but every now and then I can lose. So okay, good. So what's your problem? Well, I had this 20-to-10 battle, and I lost. It was 20-to-10. I said, yeah, 20-to-10. I had 10 more than the 10. I had 20. But isn't that? I said, isn't that 2-to-1? 20-to-10? No, that's 20-to-10. That's a whole different odds than 2-to-1. Okay, so we actually adjusted. Okay, I can see you have 10 more, so that's a lot. Okay, cool. Okay, so now we made the adjustment, gave the game back. Now are you happy? Well, kind of. But let me tell you what happened. I had this 2-to-1 battle, and I lost, which is okay. We've had this discussion. I understand now that every now and then I'm going to lose a 2-to-1 battle. But right after that, I had another 2-to-1 battle, and I lost again. How can that be? How can I lose 2 2-to-1 battles? I mean, one I can understand. The computer's out to get me, obviously. Okay, so we actually take into account the results of previous battles now when we do our combat calculations. And then the player was very happy. And we don't really do this just to make the player happy, but it's really when something happens in a battle like this that feels wrong, we start to lose that suspension of disbelief. The player comes out of the game and starts to pay attention to other things that are going on and not what's in the game. So it's all part of the process of really trying to maintain the suspension of disbelief as the player is playing the game. And something really kind of clear and instructive about this process, I think, the interaction between logic and science and math and psychology kind of really became clear to me in this process. And, I think it all makes sense, but it's very counterintuitive. And I think one of the things about really including the psychological part of things in game thinking and design is it's going to run into a number of counterintuitive things, and we'll see a little more of that later. But there are many times where that actually can work to your advantage, and it's not always quite the process that we just went through. So this part is called my bad. Times when I really screwed up and kind of came to realize that it was because my brain was too logical and scientific, and I hadn't really included a lot of the psychological aspects of what goes on in games. The first bad thing I did in life was to make Civilization a real-time game. The original prototype of Civilization was real-time, kind of inspired by SimCity and that genre of games where you're kind of watching something grow. SimCity, I think, inspired a lot of designers to branch out in kind of construction-oriented games, growth games. But what we found with the real-time version of Civilization was that the player really became an observer, was watching what's going on, was really just an observer. And the mantra that we had in mind for Civilization was, it's good to be king. And we found that when we made it a turn-based game, all of a sudden, lights went off. All of a sudden the player was no longer an observer. They were the star of the game. They were the key ingredient, and they made things happen. Kind of ironic, since Civ is now the poster child for turn-based gaming, but Civ actually started off as a real-time game, and that was my bad. Sorry about that. Another bad thing that I did in the original Civilization design was to include this idea of rise and fall. Wouldn't it be cool if you built this cool civilization, and then, you had this kind of setback and it started to crumble, and just before it disappeared, you rescued it and you came back to win even more strong and powerfully than you did before. Wouldn't that be an awesome experience? No. Not really. What we found was that just at the cusp of the crumble, most players would reload a save game, and they would never experience the glorious re-rise that we had in mind for them. So Civilization is basically a game about progress. It's a game about rise, and more rise, and not so much the fall. Another badness that I perpetrated was in the original Civilization tech tree. The idea that I had in mind was that technology would be this interesting path of kind of discovery through the darkness, and you would kind of never know where the different paths of technology would lead. It seemed to me totally wacky that you would be thinking, back in 3000 BC, okay, if I discover ironworking, someday I'm going to have gunpowder and nuclear weapons. So we randomized the tech tree. We did a lot of things to make that process kind of mysterious. But once players realized, generally the second time they played, that there was gunpowder out there, their only goal was, how do I get to gunpowder most quickly? Give me the road. Don't randomize, don't mysterious size this thing. I know there's gunpowder out there. You can't fool me. And we understood that players want to be in control. They really want to know what's going on. And the kind of broader lesson from this for me was that any kind of randomness really needs to be treated with a lot of care. We also had the idea in the original Civilization of these kind of great natural disasters. Wouldn't it be cool to have like volcano Krakatoa blowing up, or the plague, and all these kind of famous world events happening in the game, kind of randomly? No, it wouldn't. Again, whenever anything random happens to the player, paranoia strikes in. Paranoia was one of our early psychological feelings. The player feels that the computer rolled that random number just to make their life more difficult, or they were just about to win. So random events have to be treated very, very carefully, because if they're significant, basically the player will find the worst and most paranoid explanation for what just happened in the game. Randomness at a low level certainly helps a lot to variety, replayability, things like that, but really need to be careful with randomness at a really significant level. I'm going to skip the covert action rule. That's kind of boring. The Dinos game was another mistake that I made. A while back, I gave a talk called, Dinosaurs, the 3 Glorious Failures. Basically, that was a game that I thought would be very cool, tried to create, did 3 different versions. One was a RTS type game, one was more of a strategy game, one was actually a card game. And none of them really kind of gelled together, and I was disappointed. I thought dinosaurs are very cool, and we ought to be able to make a cool game about this, but it never really came together for reasons I'm not quite sure of yet. But what's interesting to me, though, is that after Civilization, that's almost the best known game. When I talk to people, when I run into people, besides Civilization, the other question is, where's the Dinos game, So this game that I never made is like the second most interesting game for gamers. So that was my bad, but life is not over yet. And Civilization Network. This is a new game that we're working on. Civilization for the Facebook platform. A lot of kind of fun game concepts that we get to play with here. People playing on kind of an interesting schedule. Maybe a little bit of time a day, a little more time a day. Kind of making the game interesting if you're playing at the same time as other players, or if you're playing at different times as other players. The idea that you're playing with friends, so that we can really focus a lot on cooperative gameplay. Also include competitive gameplay, individual gameplay, all different kinds of gameplay mixed together. So this is really kind of a fun world to take Civilization into. And one of the ideas that we played with here was the idea of being able to give gold to other players. It was like, wouldn't it be neat? Wouldn't this really kind of lead to all sorts of interesting possibilities if we put into the game the ability to give gold to other players? You could say, I'll give you this much gold if you do this for me, or I feel sorry for you. I'm going to give you 300 gold. Or hey, please give me some gold, whatever. There'd be this fascinating kind of diplomatic negotiating dynamic that would arise in the game. What we found, however, was that nobody ever gave gold to anybody else. The thought did not cross their mind to give gold to other people. I don't know what this says about the human condition or the future of mankind, but it's kind of a sad commentary, I think. Another bad idea that I had. Okay, one of the things that I kind of promised in the blurb to this presentation was to explain how to save millions of dollars in game design. And so if you're interested in that part of the presentation, this would be the time to pay attention. One of the techniques I think that's very, very important in making AAA games on a shoestring is to really use the player's imagination as a very key tool. No matter how good your graphics are, no matter how cool your technology is, what's happening in the player's mind. The player can always visualize something more compelling, more dynamic. So the goal of everything we do is to make something happen in the player's imagination that is really cool. And often we don't have to literally show everything in the game to make that happen. If the player can imagine what's going on, imagine what Napoleon is doing when he's not actually on the screen. Imagine what's going on behind the scenes. Then we save a lot of money by not having to create all those assets and do all those things. And one example, again from Civilization Revolution, is this screen here. It says, "Foreign rulers seek your favor. The Sultan of Zanzibar sends you a caravan of exotic gifts, including 7 dancing bears." The principle here is something I call go with the flow. In other words, if it's something the player is already inclined to believe, if it's something the player there wants to believe, it's very easy to make that happen in the player's imagination. The player looks at this and says, oh yeah, foreign leaders should be seeking my favor. And exotic gifts, cool. They should be sending me, and 7, dancing bears. That's very cool. So it's happening up, in your mind. The bears are dancing. It's all happening up there, because I'm kind of inclined to agree with this sentiment right here. And we actually don't have any dancing bears. There's no Sultan of Zanzibar. There's no caravan. But by going with the flow, we've saved ourselves millions of dollars in not having to create all these models and textures and assets and all this kind of stuff, because the player wants to believe this, and all we have done is basically put up a text box. Now that allows us to save our resources, our time, our energy, for the things that are kind of harder to sell, the things that the player might not be so inclined to believe or kind of want to see brought to life with all sorts of cool graphical stuff. Another technique for saving millions and millions of dollars in designing games is to take advantage of what the player already knows. Players bring lots of their own information to games, and they don't have to, a lot of that doesn't have to be reinforced literally. Pirates, for example, a game where people bring a lot of their own knowledge to the game. So if, they see a swordsman with a black curly mustache, they probably know that that's going to be the evil meta villain that they're going to have to sword fight, and we don't need a whole lot of backstory to explain, how he got that way and what his childhood was like, et cetera. Black curly mustache, okay, bad guy, time for a sword fight. Millions of dollars saved in backstory. So these are just a couple of techniques by which you can kind of focus, I think, your energy and your resources on what's going to be really impressive, what's going to be new, and what's going to be hard to sell in the game, and take advantage of things that the players kind of going to almost automatically provide through their own imagination. Let's talk about artificial intelligence for a moment. AI is often a place where psychology really comes strongly into play, because the AI kind of represents your opponent, the enemy. And whenever you're in a kind of conflict situation, your psychological juices are flowing even more strongly. You're really committed and invested in that conflict. And so a lot of players project a lot onto the AI because they feel this competitive situation. And there's a number of different philosophies about AI, I guess my point of view is not necessarily the only point of view. There may be other points of view, but I look at AI as one element in creating an integrated overall experience for the player. In a single player game, like most of the games we're talking about, the star of the game, the key experience is the experience that the player is having. And so AI is kind of a tool to craft that experience, to customize it, to make it seem even more real to the player. There's another point of view, which is that the AI should act like another player, another person, should have humanish characteristics and should feel like another player. I don't actually subscribe to that philosophy. There's a couple things that I've seen that make me shy away from that. I'm not saying it's absolutely the wrong idea, but in my experience, if an AI has human characteristics, one thing we talk about is I want it to surprise me. I want it to be tricky and clever. No, I don't think. When AI does that, most players feel that it's being stupid. It's being it's dumb, because there's a fine line between clever and dumb, and the player is inclined to see the AI as being dumb. If the AI does something really brilliant, the player will assume that the AI peeked behind the scenes and looked at my numbers and looked where my stuff was and cheated, basically. So there's a lot of kind of psychological stuff that goes on if the AI acts in ways that are kind of out of the norm, and they generally lead to the player kind of jumping out, losing that suspension of disbelief, and trying and kind of blaming the AI for what's going on in the game. So, in the way that I approach AI is to make it almost a metric, kind of a solid competition against which you play, but which you can kind of feel and your advancement as you go on. You get this real sense of progress. There's this improvement metric that the AI is kind of predictable, kind of solid and steady, and you're the one doing the brilliant things and the clever things and getting better and better versus the AI. Another thing that AI can do is give you feedback when you're talking to the leaders in civilization. They often comment upon what you're doing and how, whether it's good or bad, or whether they like it or don't like it. When we're playing a single-player game, kind of feedback, validation is really important, because you're kind of the only person there, and these AI characters are kind of your only friends at that point in time. So having them acknowledge what you're doing, be aware of it, is really validating for the player, and is something we found in Civ Revolution was really important. That the more that the other leaders in the game kind of reflected on what you were doing and reacted, the more the player felt that somebody understood them. Kind of, you know what I'm going through, and they weren't just kind of playing in a vacuum. They were playing in a interesting world. Okay. We talked a little bit earlier about self-destructive behavior. Ways that the player actually can damage their gameplay experience. And one of the responsibilities that I think we have as designers is to protect the player from themselves. And there are a couple ways places where this really becomes an issue. One is, how do you handle the idea of load and save? I've watched people play Civilization where before every battle they save the game. If they don't win, they reload that save game, play the battle again, save it until they win the game. To me, that's not really playing the game that I designed. That's not the experience that I think is most interesting. It really doesn't require you to have a flexible strategy. It doesn't kind of require you to think ahead. If you know you're going to win every battle, the game, I think, is a lot less fun. So in Civilization Revolution, we actually save the random number with the save file, so that if you reload the save file, you get the same result in your battle. Ha ha ha. That'll teach you. I guess people did find a way to get around that, but by providing the player perhaps too easy access to loading and saving, you may actually be diminishing the experience for the player, and that is something to think about in game design. In Pirates, we actually only allow you to load and save the game when you're in a port. As you voyage around, you need to live with the consequences of that voyage, and kind of by building it into the fantasy of the game, I think it's a little less obvious that we are trying to kind of control your load save behavior. But that's something to think about, is finding ways to build your load save restrictions kind of into the fantasy, the story of the game. Another area where I think we can damage the gameplay experience for the player is in providing them too many options, settings, things that they can kind of customize in the middle of the game. There's all sorts of good things that the player should be able to customize. Whether you think the joystick works this way, whether you're left-handed or right-handed, all those things are key. But there's been a tendency that I think has kind of gone away more recently, but to kind of open up all sorts of gameplay decisions to the player. And to me, that's kind of wrong. We're as designers, we're here to make the game, and not to kind of hand it over to the player and say, I'm not sure how this game should work. You figure it out. So, kind of being careful with the types of things that you open up to player is one thing to think about. Another is cheat codes. Again, I think it's a way that players can actually damage the gameplay experience for themselves. I remember when we were working on Civilization 2, I looked at Brian Reynolds brought the game, and I looked at it, and there on the main menu was cheat. It was like play a quick game, play a random map, play a game, cheat. And I said, Brian, cheat, on the main menu? He said, yeah, it's cool. You can bring in tanks in the Middle Ages and run over people, and people, it's cool. And I don't disagree that it is cool. In fact, I watched my son when he was playing, have a wonderful time bringing in all these tanks and running roughshod over the pikemen in the Middle Ages. But it's like, but Brian, does the main menu, can't we just bury it 1 or 2 levels deeper? Because I kind of want the players to play the real game first before they start experimenting with the cheats and the Easter eggs and things like that. So the good news is that this cheating idea actually led directly to the idea of modding, which is very powerful. Certainly, with Civilization 2, it was a breakthrough for Civilization and added incredible amount of variety and energy to the Civilization series. This is a picture from Fall from Heaven, and so there's a happy ending to the story of cheats, and modding has been a very cool addition, kind of allowing players to exercise their inner designer and become part of the community process. So cheating, I'm not so sure, but modding is definitely a cool thing. So another kind of psychological skill I think that we need to develop as designers is listening to the player. I'm kind of assuming at this point that you've bought into the idea that game design is an iterative process, starting with a prototype and kind of building on that, getting a lot of play, getting a lot of feedback, building a game over time. And if you do that, you're going to spend a lot of time talking to the players, the people that are playing your game, getting their feedback and taking advantage of that to make your game better. But what I found in that process is that it's really not that useful to kind of take literally what your players are saying to you. There are different kind of ways that players will react to the game. One is to kind of provide you with solutions. I think you should take this out. I think you should change this. I think, this should work this way. Occasionally that's useful, but a lot of times that really doesn't take into account other parts of the game that would break, et cetera, et cetera. And it's tempting to kind of discard that. That's not going to work. I know that's not going to work. You might have even tried that. But I think it's important as a designer to get some real value out of that, to drill down to what is motivating that solution. What is wrong? What is the kind of thing that the player is feeling or doing that is unsatisfying that leads them to kind of suggest the solution? And a lot of times you can find something that is consistent with your game design and your game ideas that will solve that problem for them. It might not be the exact solution that they proposed, but it will solve the problem, and everybody's happy. Another type of comment that you might get back is kind of the opposite of that. It's an emotion. It doesn't feel right. I'm frustrated. I'm confused. again, very little information. And again, it's kind of our job as designers to figure out what is it that's causing that emotion. You know, what can I change to make that emotion go away if it's a bad emotion, or to strengthen that if it's a positive emotion. Another important. Oops. Don't look at that slide. The last thing I think is important about talking to your players is knowing their individual personalities. A lot of times that's very helpful in deciphering, decoding what they're saying, because a certain player, you know, might not like that type of game and is never going to be happy. There are certain players we call Mr. Anecdotal, who will be convinced something has happened that you know is impossible, but we'll just kind of harp on that one thing that there are people that are very generous, you know, kind of afraid to say anything bad about the game. You almost have to force them. I know you hated something about it. Come, tell me what it is. So kind of knowing the personalities of your players is important in deciphering what they're really trying to tell you, and kind of really tapping into this resources, which is really invaluable, the gameplay experience of your testers as you're playing the game. So what is the point of all this, you might be asking? I kind of like to wrap it up with this idea of the epic journey. I think this is what we're trying to create for the player, is an epic journey. I think I should trademark this one too. Epic journey. Keep that in. There's so many genres, so many styles of games, so many different ways of gaming. But I think in a way they can kind of all be encapsulated in this idea of an epic journey. And how do we use psychology to make our journey more epic and our epic more journey-like? You might be asking. Here are a couple of tools that we have to make that happen. I come back again and again to the idea of interesting decisions. That's really the core, the basic fundamental pieces of your game are these decisions that you're giving the player. And the process, the journey is the process of exploring all these decisions and seeing how they relate to each other and playing through them. So think about the decisions that you're giving your player. Are they ones that encourage them to project, to think into the future? You know, if I do this, what is going to happen? Do they have interesting, kind of not taken paths? And the coolest decisions are the ones where the player chooses path A, but they're kind of saying, well, next time, you know, that path B looks kind of interesting too, so I'm going to play next time and try that other path. Those are the really powerful decisions. If you can build them into your game, you're well on your way to creating the epic journey. Learning in progress. This is fundamental to the journey. The idea that you are constantly progressing. You're constantly at a better place than you were before. You're smarter than you were before. You're more powerful. It's kind of fundamental, but it's easy to lose track of this. I think you cannot reward and acknowledge and reflect this progress too much in a game. It's very important for the player to know how they're doing, what progress, what value has this last half hour, this last hour been to me in terms of playing. I think World of Warcraft does a great job of this. The level system makes it very clear the kind of progress you made, and there are ways of building this idea, which is very powerful into your game. One more turn. This is another way of making the journey epic. It's a concept that we relate back to Civilization, but it applies to almost every game. The idea that the player is constantly kind of leaning forward. They're anticipating things that are going to happen later. They're looking forward to their plans coming together. They're wondering what's around the next corner. You can foreshadow. You can kind of just let people know that cool stuff is going to happen soon. And it draws them very much into this one more turn phenomenon. And it kind of all comes back to this idea of replayability. That if you create a fantastic journey, and the player comes to the end of that journey, they suddenly realize that this is only one segment of this epic journey. This journey is much more epic than they even thought. because this has only been a part. The epic was a part. It's like epic squared or epic cubed or this journey is multi-epic. And replayability kind of plants that seed and makes that happen for your game. So these are some tools, some psychological tools that make your game the coolest epic journey of all time. So now you know everything. Thank you. We have a little bit of time for questions. There are some folks with microphones. I'm sure much of what I've said has been wrong, and you're going to correct me on it. But I'd be happy to take any questions or thoughts if there's anybody who would like to ask a question. Look for someone with a green, raise your hand, and look for somebody with a green shirt and a microphone. Right here.
What do you normally tell your animators, designers, artists exactly how you want the art for particular games to feel? Like, how do you explain to them what you have in your vision?
The question is, how do I explain to animators and artists what my vision is, what I want them to do? There's a couple of dimensions of that. A lot of times I will actually build a prototype myself using pieces from other games and things like that kind of create the big picture so they know what they're doing fits into the bigger picture. One of the issues I think with art is often it's easy to get kind of keyholed and only focus on the one thing that you're making. The other thing that I think is important is to kind of let your artists be artists, be creative. Put a pretty big box around what you want and let them surprise you with something that's even cooler than you imagined. So, one is having a prototype that they can always go back to if the question is, how does this fit into the game? What is this supposed to do? But then, let them be artists. I think that games as a collaborative medium really need to take advantage of all the talents that you have available to work on it. So, I try to let the artists, be as creative as they can be. Question here?
Hi. You sort of talked about player egoism and that sort of approach that players come approach games with, and I guess I'm having a hard time figuring out, do you think that this egoistic approach to games is kind of prefigured by the themes that you give them? You're going to build a civilization, you're going to become a railroad tycoon, or do you sort of pick these themes because you anticipate that this is what players, how players want to feel when they play a game?
I think one of the fundamental attractions of gaming is that you can go to places that you can't go in real life, that you can inhabit characters that you probably don't have the opportunity to do in real life. And I think it's kind of the Walter Mitty fantasy. I get to be a dashing, swashbuckling pirate. I get to run a great civilization. So we definitely look for topics that are epic, that are big, that kind of really empower the player and make them much larger than life, because I think that's what you're looking for in a gameplay experience is something to kind of take you out of the real world and into a cooler world, take you out of your real life into a cooler life, take you out of maybe your real character into a cooler character. So epic is definitely part of our thinking in putting together these game worlds, because they are, I think at the end of the day, that journey just feels cooler if it's been through thousands of years of history, or through the height of the Spanish Main, ending up with that horribly evil guy with a mustache, etc. So yes, we definitely choose kind of epic, larger-than-life situations, because I think it makes a more compelling game, and it also taps into a lot of common knowledge and fantasy, which we can then use in building the game. Question over here?
Hey, with a limited amount of time that people have to play games, like as an adult, wouldn't it make more sense to make a single epic journey rather than having them play through it like 2 to the n times?
I think people appreciate the value of replayability. I mean, there are sequels out there, so if you had a great experience with a game, you often want to do it again. I don't think people do have a limited amount of time to play games, but I think they select what games they want to play in that limited amount of time, and it's even more important for that reason that they're playing a game that they like. So replayability kind of allows you to play a game that you know you're going to like with that limited amount of time that you have. Here.
Hello. I have a question about the flight simulator point you made earlier.
Yes.
I've worked on racing games for a while, and the last one we released was Midnight Club 4 last year, which critically got slammed because everybody thought it was too hard. And we worked really hard to make it so you didn't have to win to progress and succeed in the game, but the conception was that people were really, really frustrated when they weren't coming in first all the time. And I was wondering if you had any advice or solutions for trying to condition the player to accept that they're not going to win all the time.
You're definitely walking uphill there, or walking into the wind. I think the expectation is out there that you're going to win. I think you have to do a lot of work to make it fun, not to win. Certainly realism and authenticity are cool things, but you have to work hard to sell that idea. I'm a big Gran Turismo fan, but even that game, I think you still end up winning very often, even though it kind of has the real feel of authenticity. Good luck, but that's a tough one. Over here.
Hi, you were talking about how it's really good to present the player with choices, and when it comes to a lot of games lately, they've been doing a lot of the moral choices, like good or evil. Is it more positive to do that and have the player expect a certain outcome, or would you rather see games start moving into the morally gray area where it's more uncertain?
That's a good question. I am not a fan of morally gray games. I think that this unholy alliance that we made with the player, to me, excludes that unless you're very clear up front that this is a game about gray moral choices, because you're asking the player to invest this time. One of the analogies I use is like showing up on your first day at high school. You're kind of wondering, what are the rules here? Who are the cool people? How does this place work? And you're kind of very vulnerable early in the game, and you want to kind of be encouraged and kind of know that this time that you're investing and spending is taking you down the right path. And these, the idea of the morally gray choices and things like that, I think it always plants the idea in the player's mind that, I might be on the wrong track here. All this time I'm investing now, this might be just taking me off in the wrong direction. And I think that's an opportunity for the player to kind of say, maybe I should try something else. So I think you have to be very clear, if your game is about morally gray, ambiguous choices, that that you're going to make sure that wherever they go, something interesting is going to happen. That they're not kind of going to be allowed to go off on some dead-end path because they made a poor moral choice. Here.
Given the number of trends that you have seen come and go during the course of your career, what would you guess would be the next big trend in gaming? Where do you see the avant-garde idea coming from in the future?
It's a really cool time, I think, to be a game designer. We certainly have seen the indie games movement put a lot of new energy into gaming. We have new platforms, whether it's Facebook or the live or places, browser games, a lot of places where the whole kind of big budget thing has gone away and opened up a lot of new opportunities for gaming. Where do I see gaming going? I think this is the year of civilization, frankly. I think there's a Civilization 5 maybe coming this year, and a Civilization Network. So, in the immediate future, I think this is the year of Civilization. But looking further out, there's so much energy and dynamism, I think, in this industry that it's part of, I think, what keeps us, every day looking to see what's new, and that's big part of the excitement, I think, of being part of this industry. Thank you. Over here.
Hi. Throughout your presentation, you've talked a lot about how people hate failure in video games and avoid it. I would like you to speak a little bit more on how you can make a video game that just keeps getting better and better, or if that is possible, and how you personally avoid the feeling of losing or failure in the video game.
I think almost every video game is built on the idea of progress. Now that doesn't mean that progress is free or automatic or guaranteed, but the player wants the basic experience to be one of getting better, learning, progressing. But the more that feels earned, the more satisfying it is. So in order for that to feel earned, there has to be the potential of a negative outcome, the potential of something bad happening. And when that happens, I think one of the key points is that the player understand why it happened and what the player can do to prevent that from happening the next time. I think that's a win-win in many ways, because the player is now thinking about another way of playing, about playing again, but you've also added to the value of the next piece of progress because it was won in spite of this adversity. So managing the kind of reward and punishment process is really fundamental to game design. Over here.
Hello? Yeah. Hi. You talked earlier about trying to maintain the player's idea of winning, always wanting to win, and the whole problems arising with the load save issues. Now, a lot of times when I was playing Civ, even though I'd win the game, it much became a point about trying to beat my own score. And in order to do that, I had to take much more of an edge by, and it did come down to that whole load save issues. I hated it when I lost a 1 or there was something else I needed to get me to the next point. So my question to you is, how do you accommodate your design when the player's not just trying to beat the machine, but beat themselves?
I think that's another dimension of progress in one way, that you feel that progress against your own score. Whether you use the load save mechanism to do that or not, it's kind of your own moral choice, I think. Games give you many, many ways to play, and you get to pick the one that's hopefully most satisfying to you. Some of the talk about self-destructive behavior was kind of oriented towards, maybe there's some things we shouldn't make that easy, because at the end of the day, you might not feel as good about your victory if you use some of these things. And in Civ Revolution, we actually had these kind of Iron Man modes, or we would actually keep track of the number of load saves that you did, and that would be mentioned along with your score, so you could kind of, by doing it without loading and saving, for example, that would actually be something that would be noted on there, and let you feel even better about your final score.
Hi, Sid, over here all the way to your left.
Yeah.
In regards to the social network gaming, there is a rampant kind of issue with cloning of games. So there's like 12 farm games and 22 island games and 73 sim games now. How do you foresee the protection of your IP or your big civilization network? Because it's an issue for everyone who's developing on social networks.
That's definitely an issue. I think my role is to make the best game that I can make. We're playing the game almost daily right now, and we're putting in all sorts of cool stuff. So, I think the way that we try and deal with that is to make the best way that we get best game that we can, and in that way make it very difficult to duplicate, because someone would have to go through that same testing experience and trying all the same dead ends that we tried that didn't work before getting to kind of the what does work. I think that question is my role as a designer is just to make the best game I can make. What the industry does is kind of out of my hands, but I love my job, so I'm not complaining. Right here.
Hi, thanks for the talk. Loved it. My question is about player expectations. Do you always have to acquiesce to these? Have you ever purposefully flown in the face of what the player expects? And about the example of the math and the soldiers 3 versus 1, is there a deeper immersion achieved if a player's belief is rectified and he gains a feeling that he understands the player or the mechanic rather than just having a vague notion of math that he was using before?
I think the fundamental purpose for dealing with the combat odds situation the way we did was to not give the player a reason to jump out of the game, to suspend their disbelief. That was kind of our primary goal. What I kind of realized, though, in going through that process, was that in some ways the player is actually right about what they're feeling. That in a computer game, we say the odds are 3-1, but the player isn't actually rolling the dice. They don't actually see that process. That's all happening somehow in some mysterious background code that some designer wrote, that they may or may not trust, and so that they're kind of at the mercy of the designer. So if bad things happen there that they can't see the reason for, this paranoia is really going to kick in. So that by making the odds, the outcomes kind of conform to what the player's expectations were, we kind of damp down this paranoia and also keep them in the game. That was kind of the thinking process that we went through. We don't always try and meet the player's expectations exactly. I mean, there have to be surprises, have to be new things. I put ballroom dancing into the new Pirates game. That was a surprise to a lot of people. Might have been one of the things on my bad list, but so we do try and surprise players, but not in kind of fundamental things that determine their success or failure.
Hi, thank you. Great talk. Kind of a follow-up to that question. In the way that your 9 difficulty levels work, does the math get more honest at the higher difficulty levels? And second follow-up question, your personal preferences in gaming. Do you enjoy games that are unabashedly difficult, like Demon's Souls?
First question was, how are the difficulty levels implemented? There's no simple answer to that question. I think that again, AI difficulty to me is a full range of tools that we use to create a customized experience for the player. The first difficulty level is one that basically takes you on a tour through the game. You're probably going to win at the end, but you're going to get to see all the cool stuff that happens, and you'll understand that the next time it'll be more difficult. And with Civ in particular, the highest difficulty level is something that has to totally kick your butt every time, or else you don't feel satisfied. It's a point of honor just to survive, the highest level. So we're customizing those difficulty experiences using all sorts of different tools. Do I enjoy games that are very difficult? Generally not. I guess the problem for me is I pick up a game, and if I'm not really having fun in the first 15 or 20 minutes, I'm going to say, I'm not going to really invest the 10 or 20 hours it's probably going to take to start to get some fun out of this game or really explore it. So I'm, I guess, a pretty typical consumer in that fashion. Over here.
During your slide presentation on My Bad and the design mistakes, there was a brief mention of an espionage game mechanic that you didn't feel was very interesting to talk about. Can you briefly summarize what that was and what you learned? We call that the covert action rule. Covert action is a game I wrote many years ago. And basically it was an espionage game, and there was this kind of interestingly complex mystery that you were trying to unravel with people in different cities doing different things to do dastardly things to the world. And in the process of unraveling that mystery, you would go into these action sequences where you'd sneak through a building and open safes and clues, and guards would chase you, and you'd follow cars around, and you'd break codes and unravel these circuits, all sorts of cool action sequences and puzzles. And based on our Pirates experience, we thought that was very cool. Because Pirates, for us, was a really neat combination of action and role-playing and
strategy and all this kind of stuff working together. But what we found was that there are really two games fighting very hard against each other. That you were in the mystery part of the game and you're trying to put together the clues and figure things out, and you say, okay, I need to go to Cairo, and break into this building, and that's the next, it's going to take me to the next step of this mystery. And you do that, and you kind of have this cool action sequence, and you'd pop out of the building at the end, maybe 5 or 10 minutes later, and it's like, what was that mystery again? Why did I go into that building? And, kind of the two games are not necessarily better than one was the rule we call the covert action rule, is that the center of gravity of your game kind of has to be in one place. Everything else kind of supports that, enhances that, but you've got to figure out, is the center of gravity in the action? Is it in the strategy? How does that all work? And we kind of, when we look back at Pirates, we realize that the center of gravity of that game is kind of in the strategy, that the ship battles, the sword fights, etc., are kind of quick and clear enough that you don't lose the thread of what's going on when you come back to the strategy game. I think we have time for one more question. Is there someone? Yes.
Thank you. When I was much younger, I had a lot of time to devote to playing your games. I loved the detail. And as I'm getting older and I'm getting all these responsibilities, I'm finding the detail overwhelming. So I'm wondering, is a situation like mine, the aging gamer, is that playing a role in your game development process? And if so, how are you dealing with it?
I have to say yes. I mean, I'm an aging gamer myself, and I think we have certainly evolved from a kind of a hardcore gamer-based industry to now we're seeing all these diverse audiences for games. And I think in a way, Civilization Revolution was kind of my response to complexity of games. I think there are players that don't have 10 or 20 hours or 40 hours, 10, 15, whatever amount of time it takes to fully enjoy the fabulous Civilization PC experience. But you don't always have that. You might have and you might want to play a game with someone who's not that deeply into Civilization. So Civ Revolution was an experience that was geared towards that audience. And it was something that I found very interesting to design. It kind of tapped into, in many ways, kind of where I was in terms of gaming. I wanted to sample a lot of different games. And so, I think we're seeing this incredible diversity of games these days. I mean, from games that take only a few minutes to play, games that you play every little bit of time every day, games that you sit down with and totally devour, that take tens and tens of hours. I mean, it's a great time to be a gamer. It's a great time to be in this industry because we have all this variety, all these possibilities. But there's definitely, an aging gamer demographic. There's a casual gamer demographic. There's hardcore gamers. There's all sorts of gamers. And once a year, we all get together here in San Francisco and celebrate ourselves. So thank you again for coming, and it's been a pleasure.